organizations set realistic timelines for GenAI implementation? What is your advice on managing expectations and pacing things out when rolling out a technology as complex as this?
I think when it comes to generative AI, it is no different than any product build that an organization would probably have to think of, right? Before really looking at building a product, an organization needs to understand how is that product going to result in business value, which means going back to Tathagat's point, is the product really solving a customer problem, right? So that's the first and foremost. When that is defined and when that process is very clearly set and cemented, done and dusted, then the process of how to start implementing comes in play, right? That's a first step. Many a times what happens is that first step is missed. Organizations jump directly into implementing and then they figure out that this is not the route. They go back, change the process, again come back, and this becomes an iterative step. By the time organizations probably figure out that they spend more money thinking about what to do than actually doing, and then really going out of this whole process gets dropped, right? We definitely don't want that to happen. So which means assuming that an organization is able to clearly define what are the generative AI solutions that they want to build and what kind of business value it adds. I think once that is figured out, an organization definitely needs to look at the feasibility of that solution, right? Ideally, the feasibility itself should have been looked at while the organization is designing on a particular solution. But once we are able to do it, be able to quickly experiment and build a pilot, a demonstration that can allow the organization to be confident that this can essentially be productionized, right? The best example would be what these generative AI models themselves are doing, right? When ChatGPT 3 came in, before the ChatGPT 2 came in, right? And 3 was in a preview mode for some time before it started opening out to the general public. Similarly, I think organizations also have to start looking at building a pilot first. The pilot phase should be designed in such a way that it allows an organization to fail fast and fail cheap, be able to think about, okay, whether the solution is going to be something that they can invest on or not very quickly, right? I would say that phase would be anywhere between 8 to 10 weeks. They should be able to figure out that a particular pilot is completed and a particular solution can really be useful for the customer. When that pilot phase of the first 2 months, the organization is able to do that, during that time, there should be a clear call out and approach of how this whole solution is going to get rolled out. Because in a pilot phase, what is typically happens is an organization is extremely focused on just the generative AI part of the solution. Not all applications are generative AI based applications from the word go, right? Generative AI is probably part of a workflow, right? So many a times the organizations figure out that, okay, if I solve this generative AI part, the other workflow part would get automatically addressed, which is not the case. Why? Because during pilot, if you don't test the integrations of a workflow and you just focus on just testing the generative AI, you are grossly missing the entire outcome. So being cognizant of the integrations that are needed for applying a generative AI solution is super important. You take an example of, let's say, in the healthcare industry. Let's say a hospital wants to build generative AI where doctor-patient conversations are recorded, translated, and the generative AI is able to probably summarize the conversation and then create the right kind of medical coding, medical codes based on the transformation, based on the transcript, and then send it to the medical billing team to identify what kind of treatment and what kind of billing needs to be done for the patient. So this is a complete workflow that is being taken care by many EHRs systems today, right? If you introduce generative AI, which is basically introduced not in the full workflow, but part of the workflow, and you think that the generative AI is actually doing its job of transcribing and summarizing and creating the medical codes, and if you think that your pilot is done, you are grossly wrong, because unless you actually integrate this generative AI with the EHR and make sure that the responses of the generative AI is going and embedding itself into the EHR, making the users look at the outputs of the generative AI, testing the outputs, all of these need to be taken care of during the pilot. So a pilot is not just testing the generative AI, but it's actually testing the entire business use case that organizations need to be very, very clearly aware of, number one. And as much as they include all of these things in the pilot, they need to really roll out a phased strategy of once the pilot is done, what is their immediate implementation in production, right? Who are the customers that they want to really look at the first draft version or the preview version of their product? They should have that very clearly written in their plan even before the pilot starts, and that's very, very important. Second aspect that organizations need to be really thinking about when it comes to timelines is the timeline should take into account any of the data pipelines, the data ingestion, transformation, storage. All of this is probably is probably not visible. It's all in the back end, and that comes in only after problem start comes in, right? Like, so they have to plan for all of the data work that is needed to help the application get the best out of generative AI, and that needs to be happening. And the pilot phase also needs to take into account the amount of testing that is required for that application, right? Even if it is not as good as what you do for a production application, you should know that a pilot, you should plan for a testing phase for the pilot as well. So all of this needs to be very important when it comes to realistically building timelines. So a pilot would typically need anywhere between 2 to 3 months to plan all of this, take a small version of the product, the first version of the product that you are envisaging, and making sure that you run this as a small project before you really think that this can be implemented and taken to the customers.
Sure, Anand, understood. So definitely, as we understand that companies need to understand that this is not a quick process. It takes time and it is a continuous process. It's a step-by-step phased approach would be a good idea for GenAI implementation. Let's move on to the investment side of things. Anand, Tathagat, we see that companies are allocating significant resources towards research and development of new use cases, and they are building proprietary GenAI models. Say, if we take the financial sector, for instance, banks are investing heavily in GenAI powered risk assessment models, predictive analytics, and automated financial advisory services. In fact, a leading global banking giant has recently rolled out an AI-powered wealth management assistant, and it's a great success. But then again, we see instances where companies have failed miserably, and their Gen AI has resulted in massive losses. So this brings us to the question that before companies make that big leap, and Tathagat, if you'd like to add your insights on this, what are the top strategic factors such as market trends, regulatory risks, or scalability that executives should weigh?
So I think that's a very important question, Saloni, and thanks for asking this. I would certainly say, go to the point of saying that the firms have to be, yes, they have to be cognizant of what is the market and the external regulatory and other related technological risks and all. But I think even more important is first they need to understand about themselves. Like, is this really the, first of all, make a list of what are the most important business problems they want to solve. That to me has to be the starting point of it. And then really understand how can a given technology solve the problem. I am also not in favor of Gen AI, applying Gen AI indiscriminately over everything. Not every problem needs to be solved using generative AI. You may be able to do it with the conventional predictive AI, or you may not even need AI for that matter. Because let's say your reliability or predictability, accuracy is so important that you cannot have that level of variance in that. Or if your business logic is so cut and dry that you already know what kind of a rule engine you can make, you might be able to make it through other forms of it. Like if it's a simple if then else kind of a logic, then you probably don't want to get into a AI kind of a thing just to simply do an AI sprinkle over things there. So I think what's important is to first understand what is the problem I'm going to solve. And then after that, really understand, obviously regulatory space is important because, for example, you may be in healthcare or any regulated space where there might be expectations. Now, the big question that comes is the standards are not in place. A lot of those areas are still under development. I always tell people, think of it like any other technology. Let's say you are in the toys industry and you are making toys for the children. You are not allowed to make toxic paints on the toys, or you are not allowed to make paints that are going to be transferred to the human skin. As simple as that. Now, why should the logic be any different for generative AI? Simply because it's a software technology. I think the basic first principle approach is an important one. So if you are in a regulated space where there is no clarity on the rules or compliance as to, hey, we don't know what will be the government say, we don't know. I think to me it is like fall back on your common sense, fall back on the first principles, fall back on what are the generally acceptable rules of how what kind of a product safety can we do in public domain, and kind of go and do that thing. So the firms will be better advised to essentially look at, in the absence of any other central regulation, and kind of look at self regulation and say, would I do it to my children, would I do it to my family, would I do it to somebody in our society? If I would not do it, why should I do it? Simply because there is a new technology available. In terms of the market risks and all, yes, there is a hype. There is no doubt about it from a media hype point of view, and there is even a financial hype, one would argue. I think I remember seeing this update on Twitter somewhere that the total amount of market projections that have been done by the top AI companies, I think their market cap is like 500, $600 billion. But the total amount of revenues that they have brought in is only about $20 billion or some such kind of a thing, which shows that there is a huge hype and a huge mismatch in the expectations of reality versus what is being projected by the media update. I think the firms have to make it a point not to fall into the trap of believing and testing for themselves. So in God we trust, but bring the data, that kind of a thing there. The firms have to build their own proof points and say what works for them, what does not work for them, and then apply the investment thesis into what really makes for them. Something may make sense for, like I remember during the COVID time, for example, there was a lot of hype and hoopla around some of the things, like crypto was a big thing at that time. There were a lot of those new technologies. I remember there was one particular audio only audio only social media platform that came in, and I think within 3 months its valuation rose up to $4 billion or something. Today, I don't think anybody has even used that for last 2 years or 3 years. So I think one has to also give the time for the hype. Hype is like the froth when you pour a fluid, right? It kind of settles down after some time. So look for the clarity and not just not everything that is making a lot of noise is going to be good for the business, and look at adjusting the timelines accordingly. Sometimes better solutions may emerge rather than the first solutions that appear on the horizon. So I would say these to me, and none of them, by the way, is unique to generative AI alone. Yes, there are elements of it which are unique given the cognitive nature of it, given the stochastic nature of the solutions that we are building, and given the whole idea, not the stochastic nature, but also the learning nature of it. If it's a true machine learning kind of a solution, if it's a true feedback driven adaptation of the system, then you are going to see the system behavior change over a period of time. Now, whether it changes for the better or for the worse, you don't quite know, but it will change, right? So that's an important part of these systems. And then lastly, I think the bigger point that's coming is with the whole multi-level, multi-agent systems, which is, I think, entering a totally new world. And I've been studying the complex systems for several years. I see more similarities to the complex systems which happen in nature and biology. For example, economics is a complex adaptive system, or flying of birds in a formation, or the human intelligence is a complex adaptive system. A lot of those behaviors emerge out of those interaction between the individual elements of it. I think we are going to start seeing some kind of complex system behavior in the coming time. I won't right now call it as an outright organic sort of an emergence, because these agents are still computational agents. These are not biologically organic agents. So we should not confuse between their intelligence as intelligence that we associate with the living intelligence, with the human or non-human living beings. These are computational logic which is being driven by a certain kind of a thing. But the collective behavior of such agents when they are operating, like I talked about cheating. Cheating is never really by design that anybody is baking it into the system. And yet, by the simple act of saying that you have to win come what may, the prompt is actually making an agent undertake cheating behavior just in order to win. Now, that kind of a thing of maximizing the whole goal at the cost of everything else can be very perilous to the business. So I think a lot of those behaviors other firms may not have seen, but only if you really undertake those kind of experimentations, you are likely to see it. So I would say, to sum it all, I think there are obviously it is like going to a big bazaar, right? I mean, like not in a company as a, but like a big marketplace sort of a thing. You can buy anything. You can buy good items. You can buy bad items. You need to decide what is the right thing for you and what serves your purpose and why are you buying it in the first place, and then you kind of make a decision around it. And things will keep changing around us. We live in a constant flux all the time. But the firms have to really be right gatekeepers and make sure that they are not succumbing to the market hype, or they are not kind of taking a refuge behind the externalities, but kind of deciding what is right for their business and then driving it from there. So I would say basically going back to the first principles, wherever there is no clarity on the external things, is almost always a good idea.
Right, Tathagat. And Anand, would you like to add something to Tathagat's point and also tell us that how executives should prepare to make investments, of course, once they've secured a buy-in and a decision has been made to implement GenAI?
I think see, the when it comes to generative AI implementations, right? Like Tathagat made a very good point that not all implementations need generative AI. So executives have to be cognizant of the fact that when they pick up a use case, the use case really warrants generative AI and does not necessarily insert generative AI for the sake of inserting, right? That is the biggest mistakes that we need to avoid right in the beginning. So if those mistakes are avoided and you really bring in generative AI for the business value that it can bring and it can improve on, I think that's the first steps towards getting the right buy-in. So today's executives, at least with the help of generative AI, they have the capability to know whether a particular use case is really useful for generative AI or not. Because as I say, a human being can probably lie intentionally. With the way these generative AIs are built, at least they have certain level of initial ethics that it had been taught on. That when you go and ask generative AI that is this a real good use case for generative AI, you can most likely get an answer that no, this doesn't look like a good use case for generative AI. You can probably think of introducing it at a later point in time, right? I've seen many of these models actually responding in a surprisingly honest manner as well. As much as hallucination is always there, some of these straight answers were something that I was really happy about. So I think as executives, they first, unlike the earlier AI implementations where they may not know the full extent of what it would take for an AI investment or for a data investment, because it's all a technology product. Now with generative AI, the capability of executives to really know the feasibility of a solution has actually improved 10-pronged, because generative AI them itself can help them to understand whether a particular use case is feasible for generative AI or not, right? Simple step, I would say, in terms of investments. So I think the first and foremost step is understanding the feasibility of a solution, which is where an executive needs to prepare themselves to be equipped with enough knowledge to understand whether a particular solution is feasible or not, right? That comprehensive feasibility study is super important, not just from a perspective of implementation, but clearly from a perspective of cost and benefit, right? So that is the whole thought process that executives should bring in. So that's an angle that I would think all executives are already thinking of, right, before implementing generative AI solution. Second is being able to understand that a generative AI solution is not like an overnight implementation. There needs to be a phased investment, because it will take, while the development of the solution can be faster, implementation and continuous improvement is needed, and for that investments are needed, right? So executives should definitely think about that before they actually go and ask for more investments from their leadership team. So when they plan for an initiative, plan it with this in mind, so that they know that what they can ask for as funding from their leadership, right? And not last but not the least is in terms of upskilling, right? Because when we talk about building a generative AI solution at an enterprise level or for customers, it needs to very clearly be thought through whether a customer would be able to really use the solution or not, right? While business value can be derived, educating the customer on using the tool is going to be quintessential to achieve that business value. If the process is so tough that a customer does not want to use this solution, then it all becomes a moot point, right? Like I'll give an example. So the other day, my team was actually creating a solution for helping a particular department in our company for managing and going through some of the documents in terms of legal clauses and contracts and whatnot. So we built an internal solution which would allow someone to automatically look at input a document and then be able to come out saying what are the flaws the document has in comparison to what are the clauses that the company has, right? Now, as a person who comes from a technology background, for me, that was a complete automation. It kind of took away the need for human intervention, and the AI was actually able to give solutions. But when we asked our teams to test, the first thing that our teams were coming out with is, I was not able to understand the outputs, right? The outputs were not that clear to me because I follow a different process. And what we understood was each person in the team follows a different process of comparing documents and identifying flaws in the document. So what we thought was we missed the idea of quizzing and surveying each of those stakeholders, understanding how they look at a document, how they identify the flaws in the document or anomalies in the document. Instead, we just thought, okay, we will make generative AI work for us, right? And that is a step that no organization should take, right? So we went about doing a survey of the stakeholders, understood the way they were working, and then we corrected the whole solution. Now it is being adopted by the team. So this is an investment that an organization should be ready to do. While not every investment has a money value that can be put, these underlying exercises need to be done very effectively, and for that it takes money and effort and time, and executives need to be cognizant of that, and they need to make their leadership be aware of that, right? There are times when I meet with people who think that if I have bad data, pass bad data into generative AI will correct that data and give it back to me. Generative AI can correct certain aspects of how the data looks, but it cannot change the way the business meaning of the data is conveyed, right? And that needs to come out through a person who knows the data. So all of these things have to be considered as investments as well. These intangible investments are much more than tangible investments that someone has to plan for and get the right buy-in before they actually start implementing these solutions.
Thank you, Anand. That was a very realistic picture that you gave for our viewers there. Thank you to both of you, Tathagat and Anand, for sharing your expert insights. As we wrap up today's session, I'd like to get your thoughts on one last question that we have for today's session. That is, what is the future of Gen AI? We've talked about the challenges, we've talked about the strategies, but we want to know that what is that the people can expect over the next 3 to 5 years in Gen AI adoption. Tathagat, if you'd like to throw some light on this, please.
Sure. I mean, if I had the perfect answer for that, I would be sitting and counting my money. But nobody has a crystal ball. But I would say that it is safe to say on a couple of things. One is technology will keep evolving. I think that's a given. If we see the patterns throughout the human history, recorded history, and probably before that, that's one constant. It will keep changing. So even if there are rough edges and imperfections in the technology, in the state of technology today, it does not mean that these will be there forever. Think of it like how you start drawing your first drawing. It is never perfect, but if you give up right now, you're never going to get past that stage and get on to become a Picasso, for example. So I would say don't be scared of it. In fact, I would also put it jokingly, like if you cannot fight them, join them, kind of a thing. A lot of people fear technology in our lives. I would say that instead of being feared about it, just join it, understand more about it, so that you know how to deal with it better. So that you know what are the limits to which you can trust it. For example, play around with that in your daily life. If you are a musician, try to use things like Suno.ai and all, where you can create your own music or your own poems and songs and so on. If you are a writer, there are so many tools that are available for you to help you write a blog post. So I think the possibility is immense there. If you are a business, don't be scared about what you're reading in the media. Look at how it can help you in your daily business, how it can help your people, how it can help your process, and how it can help your customers. Look at it from that point of view, and essentially build a system in which you are learning all the time, and you are creating, you are growing along with the technology. You are, because I would say, if staying at the same place was an option, then yes, the world would be perfect. But look at it this way. If you are worried about that generative AI is going to be too risky and I don't want to jump into that, think of the world where everybody moves on and you are still continuing to stick to the past, and you will run the risk of obsolescence simply because your methods are still old and you cannot compete with the world that has already learned how to compete and operate in a GenAI world. I think that would be even more painful than going through the pains of an evolving technology and dealing with the challenges of an imperfect world. I would say embrace it, but learn how to deal with that rather than stay away and sit on the sidelines.
Thank you, Tathagat. Absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense, that it's an inevitable technology. And Anand, what key trends do you think will shape how businesses successfully adopt and scale Gen AI?
I maybe I'm just thinking too much in the future, but I think there will definitely come a day when the concept of generative AI, or people calling it as generative AI, will be stopped, because it will become a regular thing for everyone to use, right? Like as Tathagat was saying, it is inevitable. I could probably narrate a very a silly incident. So the other day I was just watching YouTube. As someone who's been in this space for some time, I'm able to differentiate between what is a deep fake video and what is a regular video. And I myself get surprised sometimes by the accuracy of how these deep fake YouTube videos are being created, that you'll have to really look very closely to find out that it's a AI generated video, right? When I was just watching it, my mom just peeped in and she was like surprised by some of the activities that were done in the video. And she said, like, look at how that person is, really acting. It is great talent. And I said, are you able to see that this is AI? This is not human being. And she was finding it very difficult to understand. I'm talking about a person who's an octogenarian and who is finding it difficult to differentiate between AI and, the real life. And that, I believe, is what is going to be the future, when the concept of Gen AI will be so intertwined with our day-to-day lives that it's going to be difficult for us to differentiate between what is reality and what is Gen AI. At least for that, I believe we all need to be cognizant of what Gen AI can bring, both as a boon as well as a bane, right? Like, we'll have to really be understanding that. And that, in my mind, is a huge shift. While it might not be a technology trend, and I can talk about other technology trends, but this one, I believe, is the biggest trend that I am seeing, which becomes much more possible for two other reasons, right? Generative AI is, I keep going back to Tathagat's well put point on general purpose technology. So many people are using it now, right? And they are not technologists alone. They are like more non-technologists. In fact, some of the things that I have found through my experience is I've found people with a lot of technology background not able to write creative prompts, but people with no technology background having been able to write great prompts, right? And that is the power that generative AI is giving to people. So more people are adopting it, and as a result, I believe it will become a common thing in the near future. Secondly, if you ask me to talk about the true trends from a technology standpoint, I personally believe that all these DeepSeek like models that have come and disrupted the process of or the cost of generative AI, I think that's probably going to be the future trend, right? Every now and then, generative AI models are going to come in, and they are going to say, I can probably help you build a model in less than $100. And I think that's probably what is going to be the future. Third is organizations building generative AI ecosystems. Like, what I'm thinking about is, imagine a college not having professors, but AI going and teaching, right, all along. And going back to Tathagat's point, employees in a company who manage agents as opposed to managing people, right? Education industry is adopting generative AI so much so that students are probably spending more time with generative AI to learn as opposed to going and sitting in colleges. Like, and unfortunately, thanks to COVID, that as such physical gathering has come down a lot among people that use software. So that I believe is a future trend that is going to change. And as I said, rise of ecosystems through agentic AI, through end-to-end processes being done by generative AI. There are instances like Devin.ai where it goes, builds an application, puts an application in production and does production support, right? Sometimes makes you question all your 20 years of experience that you've put in the IT industry is now kind of just crumpled into an AI coming and doing all of that stuff for you, right? So that is what I believe is the trend. As Tathagat said, we can either ride the wave or we can stay on the sides and see the wave passing us. I think I would rather ride the wave, probably take the risk and understand the boon and the bane side of generative AI and then learn from it, right? So that's what I believe I'll do. But I'm also sure there are a lot of people that have different thoughts around this as well.
Thank you, Anand. Well, that brings us to the close of the session. Thank you, Tathagat, Anand. Thank you once again for this incredibly thought-provoking session. We look forward to seeing how GenAI continues to evolve in the coming years. Thank you to all our wonderful viewers. Stay tuned for discussions like this again.
Thank you, Saloni. It was wonderful chatting and great thoughts, Anand. It was wonderful listening to you.
Pleasure is mutual, sir. Thank you so much.
Great. No, thanks. I think